Daniel Priestley. He's another entrepreneur, pretty smart guy. I think he's come out with a few books and stuff like that. I've followed him for a little bit here. He has this phrase that basically says that environment dictates performance. And for a while, I kind of understood that phrase as, I co-signed on that phrase, so to speak. And I was like, yep, exactly. Environment dictates performance. And what he considers to be your environment is basically all of the people, systems, situations, things that, things around you that kind of just, that basically have everything to do with what you are to achieve, right? So he basically says your environment, you can't, I'm not going to say that, but he basically says that those parts of your environment will tell you directly what you're going to achieve, right? So if you want to change your outcome, start with your environment. So initially, again, like I said, I kind of co-signed with that, and I get it, right? I know what he's saying. I understand it. But then I always had the question of, well, doesn't that eliminate the idea of personal responsibility and accountability? And it does, right? Because one could easily just say then, well, I didn't achieve this outcome because of the way I grew up. And you hear people say that all the time, right? So it's like, I grew up in the hood, so that's why I did what I did. Oh, or on a different scale, I grew up in an abusive home, and that's why I abuse everybody who comes in contact with me, right? Now, that's a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more complex, but it still doesn't, it kind of applies still, because it's just you're saying that something that happened to, the environment that you were in before is telling you what you have in life right now. And that's just not, just no. And so it really gets rid of the idea of personal responsibility, because then if you could just easily blame your environment for everything, then you can really do no wrong, right? And that's where I kind of started to split from that idea that environment dictates performance. So instead, what I think it is, and what I kind of sign on to, is just a slight twist to that, right? It's not just your environment that dictates performance. It's your response to your environment that dictates performance. And we got to break down, we got to frame this a little differently, right? I use the word frame because that's important, right? You can have two people from the same environment and end up with very, very different lives. They end up making different choices. But why do they end up making different choices even though they were in the same environment? Well, because they framed it differently. They framed their environment differently. Whereas one person says, well, we both grew up poor. We're in the hood and we're poor, right? One person says, I'm poor, so I never was able to make anything of it. And the other person, who might have the same amount, might go through the same exact thing, will say, well, I wasn't poor, I was rich because I had this, and this. So they just reframed it. And that led to their success. So what I found was that people who could reframe those things, especially when it comes to the past, people who can reframe the past end up being the most successful in whatever it is, right? So there's going to be a lot of framing and reframing talk coming up very, very soon, especially when we start to discuss having a sound heart. But so let me pull back a little bit. What do I think? What is your environment, first of all, right? Your environment is basically the situation or the conditions or the situations that you live and operate in, right? It's the sum total of all of the living and non-living things that influence the decisions you make, right? So that's the thing. So that's why I say it's what you think of your environment, basically, right? That dictates performance. And it's like, so how, because you could have the same environment, but it affects your thinking differently, right? And what you think is ultimately what you're going to do, right? So I think it's a very interesting notion, and I think that's a worthy add-on to the, environment dictates performance, because that can only take you but so far, right? Especially like if you take the corporate world, right? You have two employees here, and you set this company culture, so everybody's privy to this particular company culture. Now, can it be one for one exactly the same? No, they have different bosses and they have different teams and different groups and all that fun stuff. But in general, you can make the comparison and say like, hey, look, we're in the same culture, we have the same environment. Why is this person's performance different than this person's performance, right? And a lot of times it comes down to decisions that they make. Ultimately, that's your success is dependent upon the decisions you make, not how these external forces act upon you, right? Because there's always going to be some external force acting upon you. What you do with that is what's going to determine what you achieve. So it's not the external forces, your environment, that dictates performance. It's you. You dictate. It's your thinking that dictates. It's your feeling. It's your regulation of emotions. It's your, you see where I'm going? You see where I'm going with this, right? Performance is internal, right? Performance is internal. What you think will become what you do. And so that's my little, just the add on, or, I mean, it kind of sounds like I'm going in complete opposite. Well, not the complete opposite, right? But that's what I would add on. That's what I would say, because otherwise you're just eliminating the personal responsibility. You're eliminating the accountability, and you don't want to do that if you're going to be successful, right? The most successful people hold themselves accountable, probably more than most, especially when they don't have to. And by saying that success is strictly dependent upon external forces, that's where you kind of run into some difficulty, right? So those are just my 2 cents, okay?